I guess I think it's time now that we start our next session. And the moderator for our next session is Ararat Kostanian, again a fellow with Usanas Foundation and a dear friend. He's from Armenia. Ararat, I hope you've joined. So please, over to you. You introduce the session theme and the speakers and invite us.
Hello, dear ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me clearly. Please respond if my voice is heard clearly or not.
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, I would like to welcome all of you to Maharana Pratap Annual Geopolitics Dialogue 2024. I will be moderating a session dedicated on West Asian and South Asian comparative on Islamist organizations such as Muslim Brotherhood and other terrorist organizations. And I would like also, if possible, in comparison, to put clear distinction on defining which organizations are defined as terrorist or Salafi or conservative, because we know that scholars at the present moment are debating whether the threat is in imposing Sharia law or whether in the performance of military actions on the ground. The second issue that I would like to be presented by our panelists is how the networking has been possible in expanding from Middle East, or as it's called, West Asia, to South Asia, which is new phenomena. And we would like to know how has been possible that the networks, in what mechanism they started to expand from one region to another. And the third, I would like to also, if our panelists can give us the mechanisms on counter-terrorism, because we have seen on the ground there are many successful and unsuccessful models. At the same time, there is also mechanisms that are not based on military action, but based on community engagement or newly emerged model or vision in Islamism, which called Wasatiyah, moderate Islam, with some countries such as Malaysia and Indonesia are having successful results in countering as a non-traditional security methods in achieving counterterrorism measures. On that matter, I would like, first of all, to give the floor to reveal for us more on Islamic extremism in Sri Lanka currently and in Asia broadly. I would like to give the floor first to our distinguished scholar in the field, to Dr. Rohan Gunaratna, which he's a professor on security studies at the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. He's also honorary professor at the General Sir John Ketalawala Defense University and senior advisor of its Faculty of Defense in Strategic Studies. As well, I want to mention that he's an author of an international bestseller, Inside Al-Qaeda, Global Network of Terror, and co-authored 3 Pillars of Radicalization, Needs, Narratives, and Networks. Please, Dr. Gunaratna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. The world has witnessed 2 waves of terrorism. The first wave of terrorism emerged after 9/11. We saw that after Al-Qaeda attacked America's most iconic landmarks, there were terrorist attacks around the world. We saw bombings in Bali, where 202 people were killed, including 88 Australians. We saw another devastating bombing in Madrid, in Spain, bombings of the underground train system in the United Kingdom. The second wave of terrorism started with ISIS, or the Islamic State. That was in 2014, after Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi declared a caliphate, and about 60,000 Muslims from around the world traveled through Turkey to Syria and Iraq. And as a result of the second wave of terrorism, we saw attacks around the world. In fact, after 9/11, the worst terrorist attack that took place was the Easter Sunday terrorist attack in 2019 in Sri Lanka, where 250 people were killed and 500 injured. And of course, now we are witnessing the emergence of a third wave of terrorism. That third wave of terrorism is driven by the ideology of Muslim Brotherhood. In fact, we have seen with the Hamas attack in October in Israel, it has given life to so many Muslim Brotherhood entities. And these Muslim Brotherhood entities are not only active in the political space, but in the militant space. So what we have seen is that the Hamas is the Palestinian representative of the Brotherhood. And the third wave of terrorism is a complex wave where it is not only the groups that are associated with the Brotherhood, but we have also seen that Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, both these groups have called for attacks against the West, their allies and their friends. And that includes Israeli and Jewish targets. Now, another actor of the complex third wave that is currently emerging are the Shia groups. Iran mostly fights using its proxies. In this case, we have seen a dozen Shia groups in Iraq. We have seen the Lebanese Hezbollah in Lebanon. We have seen the Ansarullah, the Houthi movement in Yemen. Other than that, of course, we have seen a number of other groups very actively disseminating propaganda, radicalizing a segment of the Muslim communities around the world. Let me say that there are some developments in the Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State networks during this period. That is, the most significant development is Al-Qaeda today has become a proxy of Iran. Al-Qaeda leader, Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, was operating out of Kabul, and he was killed in a US strike. But the new leader of Al-Qaeda, Saif al-Adil, a former Egyptian lieutenant colonel, is now operating in Iran. For the first time, he issued a statement recently by saying that Al-Qaeda is supporting Hamas. And this is an unprecedented statement. And you can see that Saif al-Adil's presence in Iran has made Al-Qaeda take this stand. With regard to ISIS, the Islamic State, of course, it considers Israel, the Jews, the Americans, the Europeans, the West, and of course the Arab regimes as its enemies. But it does not recognize Hamas. But in the case of Al-Qaeda, we saw for the first time that recognition taking place. So what we are seeing as the third wave of threat is a complex wave where a range of Shia and Sunni actors, even actors who disagree, even actors who fight each other, they are coming together to form this third wave of threat. It is a wave that is still taking shape, and it is a wave that we all have to observe very closely its dimensions. Let me make a second point. If you look at terrorism, about 90% of terrorist attacks have been conducted by Muslim organizations. And why did that happen? It happened because of two ideological streams. One is the ideological stream of Salafi Wahhabism. So wherever Salafi Wahhabism spread, what did it do to the Muslim communities? It radicalized those communities. The ideologies crystallize into operational cells, into networks, and into groups. So if you look at the contemporary wave of threat, we have seen that Salafi Wahhabism is one of the principal reasons where global threat formation took place. In parallel, we saw the Muslim Brotherhood or the Ikhwanul Muslimin. So it is from Muslim Brotherhood, a group called Al-Jihad emerged. And from Al-Jihad, two other groups emerged. That is the Egyptian Islamic Jihad and the Islamic Group of Egypt, Al-Jihad Al-Masri and also the Al-Gamal Islam Al-Masri. These two main groups. So we saw that Osama bin Laden invited members from both the Egyptian Islamic Jihad and invited members from the Islamic Group of Egypt, that is Al-Gama al-Islami al-Masri and Al-Jihad al-Islami al-Masri, to join Al-Qaeda. Bin Laden himself was principally a financier. And when Al-Qaeda is created on August 11th, 1988 in Peshawar, the Egyptians started to dominate Al-Qaeda. Saif al-Adil, the current leader, was one of them. Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri was one of them. In fact, in their six committees of the Shura Council, 5 of their posts were held by Egyptians. So, and that is what made Al-Qaeda a very powerful global organization with experience and expertise, because they brought the Egyptian experience with them. And even if we today look at Al-Qaeda, Saif al-Adil is a former Egyptian military officer with special operations intelligence capabilities. Now, with regard to the Islamic State, what we have seen is this group has diminished very significantly in strength, but the group has also made a comeback in certain areas. And if one looks at the epicenter of terrorism, if not for the Hamas attack, the epicenter of terrorism would have moved from the Middle East to Africa. And today in West Africa, we have seen both Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State operating. Of course, the Islamic State of West Africa is the most dominant group. And we have seen ideologies, again, of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, of which the foundational ideology is Salafi Wahhabism spreading towards Asia, towards West Asia and towards South Asia. I like to make a point, and this will be my third and final point. That is, in parallel with the emergence of Muslim Brotherhood, 1922, Hassan al-Banna, who believed in gradual Islamization. We saw that Said Qutb's doctrine was revolution, using violence. And that both these ideologies established a presence in West Asia, established a presence in South Asia. And now I want to share with you that the main group that is akin to the Muslim Brotherhood ideologies, Jamaat-e-Islami. Some of you will dispute me and you will say that Jamaat-e-Islami is a peaceful group. I will say it is not the same. I investigated the Jamaat-e-Islami footprint in Sri Lanka immediately after Easter Sunday terrorist attack in 2019 as Director General of the Institute of National Security Studies in the Ministry of Defense. I interviewed those who were detained, and I found out that 40% of the attackers who joined the Islamic State or ISIS in Sri Lanka, they were from Jamaat-e-Islami. About 60% of those who joined the Islamic State in Sri Lanka, they were Salafi Wahhabi. So you can see how these two ideologies have in many ways radicalized the Muslims, creating the preconditions for the emergence of a terrorist network in Sri Lanka. And we have also seen that these two ideologies have now made a very significant presence to Southeast Asia. In Southeast Asia, we have seen a group that is very close to the Muslim Brotherhood in Indonesia called PKR. Similarly, we have seen a similar group operating in Malaysia called PAS. And other than that, in the Philippines, again, Muslim Brotherhood, a king group has been created in the Philippines, in Marawi. So what we are seeing is that the threat has moved from Egypt, from Saudi Arabia, so from basically the Middle East into the South Asian region, and it is further moving towards Southeast Asia. And I'm also able to inform you that some of these ideologies have created very small pockets in Northeast Asia, notably in Korea, in Japan, and in Taiwan, because there are migrant workers from South Asia and also from Southeast Asia that have traveled to Northeast Asia, and they are now replacing local and traditional Islam. Wherever local and traditional Islam is preserved, there will be peace. Wherever local and traditional Islam is replaced either by the ideologies of the Muslim Brotherhood or by Salafi Wahhabism, there will be what you call exclusivism. That is, the Muslims will become isolated. The Muslims will not want to have good relations with Muslims who are not like them, and also with non-Muslims. So I would say that we should develop 4 strategies to fight this threat. One is that governments around the world should develop a policy to promote local and traditional Islam, not these foreign ideologies that are actually not Islamic, but political ideologies. They present themselves as religious ideologies, but in reality, they are political ideologies. This is the first and the most important thing. Second is that Muslim communities should be educated about the impact of Salafi Wahhabism and Muslim Brotherhood ideologies, because they eventually result in exclusivism, extremism, violence, and terrorism. This is the cycle. It's a cycle of prejudice, of suspicion, of resentment, of hatred, of anger, and violence. Any case study you will look, whether it is in Indonesia, whether it is in Sri Lanka, we will see the evidence of that. So South Asia, Southeast Asia, and towards Northeast Asia. Third is to ban preachers who are either brothers or Salafi Wahhabis from traveling to those countries, because those preachers will never do any good for those countries. And fourth is to ensure that we monitor the cyberspace and block the websites that promote these ideologies. So the fifth is we have to move towards security and intelligence cooperation from security and intelligence cooperation into collaboration. That is done in 5 ways. One is have common databases. Second is exchange personnel. Third is do joint training. 4 is joint operations. And 5th is to share experience and expertise. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gunaratna, for your insightful remarks and for defining clearly and showing the differences between ideologically different groups, whether they are conservatives in ideology or whether they are more Salafist and more radicalist in military-wise. I have also, if you don't mind, one question to you, whether if you consider, if you have mentioned the 5 points how to counter terrorism, but to what extent you see the non-traditional counter-terrorism measures, if we pay attention both in Middle East and in Southeast Asia, the case studies and models that interfaith relations have been in community in terms of social cohesion has brought some successful models in whether it's Christian, Muslim, or other religions with interaction with Muslim majority or minority. They have brought some positive remarks in interaction and in bringing social cohesion. Can we see that in terms of successful, peaceful elements in non-traditional counter-terrorism measurements or not?
So terrorism is fought in 3 ways. One is using kinetic and lethal force. This should be 10%, but unfortunately it is 90%. So we have to reverse the model. We have to put more efforts in community engagement. That is educating the public and educating government. That is called raising the specialist understanding, meaning government, raising the public understanding, meaning the communities. That is just one example. That is called counter-radicalization or prevention. The second dimension is rehabilitation. We have to rehabilitate terrorists who have been punished and those who we have assigned for rehabilitation. Both categories we have to rehabilitate. We have to build a brand new legal and policy framework to do this and implement rehabilitation in 6 ways. One is religious and spiritual rehab, educational rehab, social and family rehab, vocational rehab, creative arts in rehab, and psychological rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is a game changer in the fight against terrorism, and we have to implement this. So what you mentioned is also very important, inter-religious engagement. UAE is doing it brilliantly, and so are some other countries. Jordan is doing it brilliantly. The king is very good at it. So I believe that the Salafi Wahhabis, they don't want this kind of engagement. But fortunately, after MBS became crown prince and he has assumed power, he has put the Wahhabi clerics in prison. I visited Saudi Arabia at the invitation of the government. I visited the Al-Hair prison. There are 2,000 Salafi Wahhabi clerics who are radicals, unwilling to change, and they are in prison. So governments should have no fear whatsoever of imprisoning hateful preachers. That is why I said we need new legislation to control, contain these radical preachers. For me, a radical preacher is much more dangerous than a terrorist operative. So governments will have to rethink of this threat in a very significant way and take firm and decisive action against those who incite violence and divide communities. 99% of the Muslims are peaceful Muslims. But there's a very tiny segment that has been radicalized into violence. So we have to win the hearts and the minds of the Muslims. And we should never be afraid to tell the truth of what is the problem, because Muslim leaders have miserably failed. Most Muslim leaders have miserably failed to pronounce what is right and wrong because they want to stay in political power. And I believe that Muslim leaders should say, for example, when the Hamas attack took place, Muslim leaders should have asked Hamas, release the hostages. You see, they didn't do that adequately. So I believe that we all should work towards a two-state solution for the Palestinians and the Israelis to live in peace. I believe that this is a must for the Palestinian people, but Muslim leaders also should have criticized Hamas because Hamas conducted a very brutal and a barbaric attack. So there must be a greater engagement of leadership when it comes to fighting terrorism in parallel with addressing the grievances and the aspirations of the Muslim communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Gunaratna. And also it was very important mentioning that the majority of the Muslims and the majority of human beings in general, we are peaceful people and we are trying to find solutions for living in a peaceful landscape and atmosphere. Why I raised the question on social cohesion, because myself I'm doing research on Christian minority and Muslim majorities, and I'm trying to bring the successful model to show to the world that there are successful social cohesion models both in the Middle East and in Southeast Asia. And maybe in future, I'm not an expert on defense and security, I'm an expert on political science, but maybe we can bring these models, how successfully done in social cohesion, as a peaceful, non-traditional method that could be educative as well for the societies that they are not being able to find a solution in living peacefully. Thank you very much again for your insightful remarks and for joining us to this session. It's an honor having you. Ladies and gentlemen, next I want to invite Dr. Michael Barak. He's a senior researcher at the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism, when he serves at the head of Global Jihad and Palestinian Terrorism Research Desks. He's a lecturer at the Lauder School of Government Diplomacy and Strategy at Reichman University. Hello, Dr. Barak. Dr. Barak, can you hear us?
Yes, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Welcome to our session. It's an honor having you here, and maybe you can give us a clearer understanding of how Muslim Brotherhood had been able to create networks not only in specific countries by advocating the Islamic style of civil society and charity mechanism that they have been famous in some Arab countries, as we know, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and etc. But maybe also you can give us the ideological basis of Muslim Brotherhood, because we know that, and we not very clearly defined, we academics yet, how an organization can be not engage in military actions, but sometimes in some historical period they had also military groups that they have been engaged on the ground. First. Secondly, maybe you can also reveal and clarify how these networks interchangeably in chains they have been able to work together. And we've seen during the Arab Spring especially how Muslim Brotherhood took the lead after the liberal demonstrations that they wanted change, but the situation under the lead of Muslim Brotherhood went totally to another direction. Thank you. The floor is yours.
So thanks, Thanks a lot. So first of all, I would like to thank personally to Dr. Abhinav for the invitation to the Maharana Pratap annual Geopolitics dialogue, and to his team for organizing this wonderful and important conference. So my deeply appreciation, and it's a privilege to be here. Actually, I plan to talk, I can speak about the Muslim Brotherhood, but I plan to talk about the impact of the 7th of October massacre of Hamas on the discourse of global jihad actors, namely ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and also part of the pro-Iranian resistance axis. If it's fine, and then I can address also to the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm also going to mention the Muslim Brotherhood in the context of 7th of October, if it's fine. If not, I can speak about the Muslim Brotherhood. So let me please begin. Let's say that generally all the terrorist organizations, I mean Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the pro-Iranian resistance axis, like Lebanese Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen, they portray the attack as a cosmic event or a watershed moment that is supposed to change history and the global order in favor of the Muslims. Hezbollah and also Iran also say that this terrorist attack is a proof that the US is losing its hegemony in the Middle East. Now, the description of the 7th of October terrorist attack by Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and part of the resistant axis, such as the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, goes beyond being a war against the Zionist enemy. It's also seen, as I read the Arabic sources, it's seen as an internal religious war. This is what Al-Qaeda say, and also the Houthis. This is a religious war that the result must be the victory of Islam and bringing back the Palestinian territory to the Muslim nation. According to their vision and belief, the defeat of Israel can be achieved soon if more Muslims join to the jihad against Israel. Now, in social media networks, we can see that many actors, even that we were not aware for them, for example, like Hizb al-Tahrir, which I will mention, they speak about a golden moment that every Muslim should exploit and join to jihad against Israel. Let's say that since October 7th, there has been an increase in fatwas, jurist Islamic opinions published by Islamists, most of them whom were identified with the Muslim Brotherhood, such as the International Union for Muslim Scholars in Qatar. And there is a deep connection, a strong connection between this Muslim Brotherhood organization to Hamas. This organization is giving a religious justification to what Hamas did and to launch more attacks against Israel. Now those Muslim Brotherhood networks and also other terrorist organizations, they emphasize that the jihad against Israel in order to liberate all of Palestine, in other words, to destroy Israel. This is a religious individual obligation for every Muslim. Hizb al-Tahrir that I mentioned, the global radical Islamic Palestinian organization, called on Muslim soldiers to desert and join jihad. Al-Qaeda called also for targeting not only Jews, but also the US and its allies, including the Arab regimes that have connections with Israel, for example, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. And ISIS has gone even further and more extreme when he called to make another genocide against the Jews, because ISIS is disseminating like a conspiracy theory that the Jews are controlling the economy of the world and have an influence on Western governments like the United States, and therefore, in order to get rid from the cancer of the world, all the Jews in the world should be eliminated. So this is like I don't know, Nazi propaganda, or it's actually calling for genocide. What ISIS is doing. And I think that the terrorist attack of 7th of October, I think it may inspire radical Islamist groups and encourage them to imitate similar actions in different parts of the world. For example, the first sign for this can be found in the Change Stream, which is a radical Muslim Brotherhood group in Turkey that calls for adopting the 7th of October model of Hamas in order to release prisoners from jail in Egypt. So this is the first sign. The events of 7th of October and the war in Gaza have also exposed an increasing threat posed by the Houthis in Yemen. The Houthis actually have also connections to Hamas. There is a Hamas representative that is sitting in Sana'a, and they having a joint warfare in Yemen and also in Beirut. So this threat of the Houthis is not only due to their endangerment of international trade routes in the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea through pirates' attacks on ships. It seems that Abd Malik al-Houthi, the leader of the Houthi terrorist army, is interested in renewing and to restore the Zaidi imamate over large parts of Yemen and disseminating the Zaidi faith throughout Yemen and becoming a significant power factor in the region. Now, the Iranian aid to the Houthis and also Hezbollah, the Lebanese Hezbollah to the Houthis, which includes technology, suicide drones, and long-range missiles, has doubled the power of the Houthis. And I think that we should not underestimate the power of the Houthis, because they have a religious vision to spread in Yemen and to establish their jihad base that will act against everybody that can endanger his Muslim brothers. Recently, I can mention, for example, that recently a Yemeni research institute that is called Shiba revealed the plan by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and the Houthis to sabotage the submarines' internet cables in the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea, cutting off the online connection of over 1 billion people. Now, such a plan may also serve the Russian interest, because Russia is interested to weaken the power of the West. And we see that from the beginning of this year of January, there were, I think, 2 delegations of the Houthi in Moscow. They met a high official in Russia. So this is a joint interest of Russia and also the Houthis to weaken the power and the hegemony of the Western power in the region. In conclusion, as I think that as long as the war against Hamas in Gaza continues, the chances of terrorist attacks by Islamic groups against Israeli, Western, and Jewish targets around the world increase. However, it seems that even when the war in Gaza ends, the threat of terrorism will not disappear and even will increase. And I will give some reason why I assess that the terrorism even will increase. First of all, the removal of Hamas from power in Gaza and the expulsion of its leadership abroad may contribute to the establishment of new strongholds for Hamas abroad and to strengthen all the old ones. Now, there is also a possibility that Hamas will cooperate with other radical Islamist groups, such as Hezbollah and others, against Israelis and even Jews that are living abroad. We already seen that after the allegedly victory of Taliban in Afghanistan, Hamas managed to establish a stronghold in Kabul, although the Taliban denies it, but there are indications that there is a growing cooperation between Hamas and the Taliban, and also other Muslim Brotherhood networks, for example, in Turkey, and also, by the way, in India. I mentioned it in a previous panel of here. Now, a second outcome, a second reason that terrorism can increase in the region of the MENA is the young Palestinian generation in Gaza has been exposed to radical indoctrination by Hamas since 2007, when Hamas took control of Gaza. And now, against the background of the war in Gaza, we can witness more radicalization among these young Palestinians who wish and desire to have a revenge. So the challenge is how de-radicalize these young Palestinians. The question is, who is going to rule in Gaza? If it's the Palestinian Authority, if it's going to be the Palestinian Authority, who will be in the Palestinian Authority? Because there are discussions about a reform that must be inside the Palestinian Authority in order to later be the ruler once more again in Gaza. But according to discussions among Palestinians and also Egyptian circles, there is a debate if to include Hamas members inside a new reformed Palestinian Authority. Hamas members, Israel doesn't want that Hamas members will be included in this future Palestinian Authority government in Gaza, if it will be the actor that will run Gaza. Now there is also a possibility that the Palestinians who were damaged from the war in Gaza, maybe, and even Al-Qaeda, we try to exploit these poisons climate against the West. Perhaps we will be witness to increasing terrorist attacks in the West, like Germany or United States, because of their support in Israel. And we see that Al-Qaeda, for example, and also the Muslim Brotherhood, they say that the war in Gaza exposed the real face of the West, who is playing and waving the flag of human rights, but when it relates to Muslims or the Palestinians, then there is an hypocrisy, and the West is ignored from defending the Palestinian rights. So we can see that maybe those terrorist organizations will be able to recruit more manpower to their ranks because of this environment. And as I mentioned, the power of the Houthis, as I see it, is also very dangerous. It's in rise. Because the Houthis are also aimed to expand to more territories in Yemen, and especially to Marib region. This is a place where there is a lot of oil and gas, and the Houthis want to control it. Let's say that in the recent time, I see that there is a reconciliation, discussions between the Islah Party. Islah Party, this is the Muslim Brotherhood wing in Yemen. There are discussions between the Muslim Brotherhood and the Houthis in Yemen, and they want to achieve, like, allegedly peace in Yemen in the name of unity against Israel, as long as there is a war in Gaza. I think that Professor Rohan also mentioned that today Al-Qaeda has become a proxy of Iran. So we see that now there is a new leader of Al-Qaeda in Yemen, Atif al-Awlaki, and he is belong to a camp that supports the Iranian support in Al-Qaeda. And the son of Saif al-Adel, the leader of Al-Qaeda, his son today is in Yemen, and he is a good friend of the new leader of Al-Qaeda. So Al-Qaeda actually, I think, will try to promote the Iranian interest in Yemen with cooperating with the Houthis and cooperation with the Muslim Brotherhood Yemen. In other words, we see that there are more actors in Yemen that are ready to embrace and to accept the Iranian support, not because they love Iran, but because they share a joint interest, what is called maslaha. So I think Yemen can become very dangerous in this matter, where if the Houthis and the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda will have a cooperation. Now, and so this is definitely a difficult and complex, challenging period, but only determination and international cooperation on military, intelligence, humanitarian, and economic levels between the countries of the free world can help to reduce the threat of terrorism from state and non-state actors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barak, for introducing in details and revealing the condition in the Middle East currently, and in also defining the different terrorist groups and the links between among each other at the current war in the Middle East. We have from the audience one question to Dr. Barak. How do you see the Islamist ideology evolving in future, keeping in mind how it evolved from Sayyid Qutb to Baghdadi?
You mean the Islamist? I think it. Look,
Yes.
in this.
Yes.
Yeah. In this. Okay. I think it's difficult to assess, but if like Professor Rohan mentioned, there are different kinds of Islamists. There is the Muslim Brotherhood, there is the Salafi, Wahhabi, and I think that, as I mentioned, the 7th of October massacre in Israel perhaps may push, let's say, Islamists that were not found in circles of violence. They may act now more violently. Depends. Again, I have to think about it. So because this is a complex question.
Yes, the audience, I believe, wanted to ask the evolutional change in the ideology, as you have mentioned, and as also mentioned before, how the evolution changed in the ideology from Sayyid Qutb, which we know that he was the more, how to say, conservatism in the fraction of the Muslim Brotherhood, and how it went from fundamentalism, conservatist ideology to the Salafi and Takfiri, maybe, because it mentions the evolution between Baghdadi and Qutb. That was the question, I believe. Thank you very much, Dr. Barak, for your enrollment, for your presentation, and for making us to know what is going on in the Middle East on the ground currently. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you.
And now I want to make a shift to South Asia, and probably we can go deeper in our discussions in differentiating between ideologies and groups. This time we can go further, and we can try to see how in South Asia Islamist sects are similar or different, whether it is Deobandi, Wahhabi, Beralemi, or Adil Rashid extremism. I want to invite Dr. Adil Rashid. He is joined MP-IDSA as a research fellow. He was senior research fellow at the United Services Institution of India for 2 years, from 2014 to 2016. He was a researcher at UAE's premier think tank, the Emirates Center for Strategic Studies and Research, for 8 years, and also an author of a book, ISIS, Race and Armageddon, which explored so-called Islamic State's origins, ideology, vision, mission, and etc. Dr. Adil Rashid, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute privilege for me to be here today. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
I was unwell, and I felt that perhaps I may not be able to make it today, but somehow I thought I should not miss this great honor to be in such a distinguished panel and of contribution. I think what is very important here to understand, I would go by a question which one of your people in the audience asked, and from there on, I will gradually move towards my area. I think the future is very, very grim right now when it comes to the evolution of Islamist ideology. And what do I mean by there is going to be a major change, to my mind, a major change, a major shift in jihadi ideology. What we were seeing earlier was a Wahhabi, Salafi, Wahhabi-centered Sunni jihad. Now we are moving away from the Salafi, Wahhabi-centered Sunni jihad. We are moving towards more of a Hanafi-centered Islamist jihad, closer to Shia Islam, which can collaborate with the Shia, which is not as divisive as the Salafi, which is also can make hybrid associations with state actors. So earlier you had Al-Qaeda and ISIS, which were non-state actors, which were very exclusivists. They used to do jihad fi sabilillah. They used to talk about a global caliphate. Now there is a major change in the approach. If you look at Hamas, which is a Hanafi organization, if you look at Turkish groups, the groups Turkey supports, many Chechen groups which are Hanafi. If you look at the Deobandi Hanafi Taliban, Taliban is a Hanafi Deobandi organization. All these groups, yes, Hamas is Hanafi, sir, you can check it out. Hamas is Hanafi. Mr. Michael, yes, please check it out. So if you look at these groups have an association which is quite different, and an orientation which is quite different from that of the Salafi Wahhabi. These groups, for one thing, they have a notion that nationality matters. So you find Taliban, which may be an extremist organization, but it gives great deal of importance to being Pathan, to being Pakhtun, to being a nationalist. Unlike ISIS or Al-Qaeda, which does not give any importance to being from any region. They fight for the sake of their own ideology. They say they fight for the sake of Allah, and they do not want, they have no consideration for national culture or for ethnic orientation. But here you find different groups like the Houthis fighting for their people, their tribe also. You find the Pakhtuns who are fighting in the name of the Taliban for their culture. You are seeing the Chechens who are fighting in that kind of an orientation. They are people who follow a different code of jihad. They, their orientation is also where they can associate with the Shia elements very nicely. So they do not have the extremist Takfiri division which the Wahhabis used to have with the Shia elements. There is arguably, Al-Qaeda had exceptions. Al-Qaeda, in the case of bin Laden, Imad Mughniya was a Hezbollah fighter. There are allegations that there was association between bin Laden and Imad Mughniya during the Khobar attacks of 1996. And then later, bin Laden's son also got tutelage inside Iran. That was mainly because bin Laden was a person who had more of a, you can say, pan-Islamist outlook because he studied in Britain. But generally, the Salafi orientation is towards against the Rafida, against the Shia way of thinking. So now we are looking at many groups coming together. Iran backing Shia and Sunni organizations, and all these groups being backed by Russia and China, a new nexus. We found out that Russia and China in its new General Security Policy, GSI, General Security Initiative of 2023, first initiated the Saudi-Iranian rapprochement. Then it started off the rapprochement between Syria and the Arab League. And then it also said that it is going to try to bring about some kind of a settlement on the Palestinian issue. So there has been a trend where China and Russia have started asserting themselves more strongly in the West Asian Forum. And after that, we find that Iran has become a very active, politically active member. And from there on, we find that the ideology of a Hanafi Islam, which can even take Sufi elements together, goes across. Now, I will also make a few other things, add a few other things here. It is that the implications of, I agree with Mr. Barak, that the implications of the 7th October attacks is very serious for global geopolitics. If very strong action would not be taken against the impact of the 7th October attacks, these attacks will be, such attacks will be launched against Europe, against America in coming times. Because for the last 2 or 3 years, since the time of, say, the Sri Lankan Easter attacks, the terrorist jihadi organizations had faced a very big drubbing all around the world. You found out that Al-Qaeda and ISIS were virtually wiped out. And so the jihadis were looking for some kind of good news to come out. And this news has actually brought everyone, they feel, back into business. So right now it is very important that the response to the 7 October attacks should be taken very seriously. Now, it can be debated whether the response taken by the Israeli government is commensurate or the right measure. There can be political debate on that. But the significance of these terrorist attacks cannot be in any way understated. I think because you find that Europe is going to be under a lot of stress come the outcome of the Ukraine war, the state of the global economy, and the tensions which are happening between the migrant population in Europe vis-a-vis the local populations. So you are going to find that the implications for this is not just limited to the state of Israel. The implications for this spreads across and becomes a much bigger issue. The other point which I would like to make here is that we need to understand that when it comes to when it comes to Devbandis and Barelvis and the Hanafis, what is this? Why is this significant when I'm talking about this? I think earlier you had people who used to get radicalized. There was a problem when people used to get radicalized because the mainstream was still moderate. Mainstream was still moderate, and there were some people, some students, some misguided people who used to get indoctrinated by trained people, and their minds used to get completely messed up by them. Now things are spreading at a different level. Now things are getting political. Now there is going to, when state actors get involved, and when state actors start helping from behind the scenes, non-state actors in a more pronounced way, even more moderate states, even liberal actors start acting and start taking positions against certain states. You don't need that level of radicalization. Now the things are moving towards a state of war, if I may go as far as that. So
maybe you can conclude, Dr. Rashid.
Yeah, so that is, so I have a lot more to say, but I think that if we have a Q&A session, I would like to talk about the issues of the problems which the region, my own region, is facing. But I would like to say that this is a completely new paradigm shift in the way the global situation is unfolding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rashid. It's been a very interesting presentation, and I believe this statement of Hanafi nationalism in combination, it became to my mind the example when not the Islamic but Islamist organizations during the resistance against colonizations and resistance for independence, they had also united and elements of Islamist and nationalism. For instance, in Middle East and in Southeast Asia, they had both elements of Islamism and nationalism. What is interesting now from your presentation, I see now this time Islamics are trying to integrate some elements of nationalism in their actions. Thank you very much for your insightful presentation. And now I want to give the floor to Dr. Abhinav Pandya, the founder and CEO of Usanas Foundation. He has immensely written books and articles on political Islam and terrorism. And lately, he has written a book published by Routledge on terror financing in Kashmir. Dr. Pandya, maybe you can give us some more insights on the published book. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ararat. Thank you very much. And it was definitely, I must begin with my thanks and heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Gunaratna and Professor Rashid and also Michael Barak. Listening to such insightful and thoughtful speakers is always a delight. I'm mostly going to focus on the day-to-day working and how they unfold themselves, the Islamist organizations, I mean, how they unfold themselves in the society, particularly in the South Asian context. When I use the word Islamist organization, by that I mean the organizations which are not strictly terrorist, which are not operating in the dark domain. These are the organizations which work as the purely legal entities, and they work as charities. They are in the society, they are in the mainstream. But then the work which they are doing, the ideas which they are propagating, that is much, much more dangerous than what even the terrorist organizations are doing. And I'll go back to what Dr. Gunaratna said about Jamaat-e-Islami. In fact, my whole interface with the Islamist organizations began with the workings of Jamaat-e-Islami in Jammu and Kashmir. I would like to mention that in the beginning, when I went there in 2018 as a security advisor to the then governor, we realized that Jamaat-e-Islami was accepted as an organization which was seen as a charity organization running orphanages, schools, and running various other social welfare activities. It was seen as an organization which was cooperating with the government, and even the senior police officers had a very nice opinion about it. But then I started doing my field research, and I found that Jamaat-e-Islami was basically occupying social, political, cultural, and religious space. And the work which they were doing on the ground, that was far more lethal than even the Pakistan-sponsored terrorist organizations like Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and Hizbul Mujahideen. Basically, Jamaat-e-Islami was more like a support system which was operating in perfectly legal open domain to these terrorist organizations. The terrorist organizations used to operate in a clandestine mode, so they had many limitations. They could not go out to buy food stuff, they could not go out to buy mobile SIM cards, they could not openly radicalize, they could not openly influence people. But Jamaat-e-Islami worked as an organization in a very systematic manner. They had an outfit called Jamiyat-ul-Tulba, which was a students' organization. Then they had an organization for the females also. I'm forgetting the name. But then they initially in 1990s, they destroyed all the secular schools which were run by the government. After that, they started creating their own schools. They were well funded. They had much more money than any other entities. So they created those schools, and in those schools, they were teaching extremely hateful and extremist curriculum, along with the modern academic curriculum. So they prepared a whole generation of extremists. Those people, many of them, went and joined terrorist organizations. And there was a particular method, like, someone would pass out from a Jamaat school, then he would go to a Jamaat religious seminary, or let's say a madrasa. There he would study all that hateful extremist propaganda, Maulana Maududi's ideology, basically, for about an year or so. Then they would make him resign. That yes, you leave the organization, you leave this seminary. And suddenly one fine day, after 6 or 7 months, he would go and join a terrorist organization. And when he would go and join a terrorist organization, police would say that they would start questioning Jamaat. They would say that, well, we admitted him into our seminary, but then later, over time, we found that he was exuding some radical tendencies. Therefore, we decided to expel him from our organization. So we have nothing to do. And then through their schools and colleges, they created a whole generation of students and scholars who occupied the police services, they occupied the intelligence services, media, academia, schools, colleges, administration, and politics. By controlling the society, they could easily control the mainstream political parties, because they would decide who would vote for whom. Like, there is a political party called People's Democratic Party in Kashmir that openly thrives on Jamaat-e-Islami's votes. If they do not practice the ideology of Jamaat-e-Islami, they are not going to get the votes. So this is through this channel, they entered the mainstream politics also. And they could install their people as ministers, as bureaucrats, as police chiefs. So this is how they control the system on one hand. So these multiple wings you can see, controlling the society through social welfare institutions, controlling the administration by sending its cadres, and at the same time facilitating the work of the terrorist organizations, proper terrorist groups, by helping them in raising finances, raising money, sending cadres, doing all the propaganda work, and also by organizing massive social unrest like stone pelting and the kind of a massive civil agitation in the society. Now, how police saw them? Jamaat people organized the social agitation, like the civil unrest, in which the people would come and start pelting stones at the security forces. If security forces engaged in a legitimate security operation to neutralize a militant, all Jamaat coordinators, they would gather all the people, they would go to the encounter site and start pelting stones on the security forces. In return, they had to fire, and if one or two common civilians died in that police firing or the security forces firing, the entire state would rise up in revolt. That would bring more atrocities from the state, and finally that would generate more frustration, more rebellious tendencies against the state, and more recruits for the terrorist organization. And on the terror funding front, they created an excellent mechanism to generate funds. I have discussed about most of these mechanisms in my book. This is my book, and I hope you can see the cover page of the book. Can you? Yes. Yes. So the problem with these is that they work in an open domain. They are able to get charity donations from various parts of the world and then facilitate the work of the terrorist organization in such a manner by spreading hate and propaganda across the wide spectrum of society. And they have intellectuals. They have people like, who are very educated, who are very qualified in the religious matters, also in the scriptural matters, and also in the secular academic domain also. This is one organization. Another organization that I would like to refer to these days in India is People's Front of PFI, Popular Front of India. That's another very strong Islamist organization which aims to make India an Islamic country by 2047. And they have a very strong cadre-based organization. And they are running charities. They're also working on the same model. They are running schools, colleges, social welfare work, and at the same time they are sending their people into the police, administration, local politics. That's how they come to occupy the entire system. So now, if this is the modus operandi, why do you need a terrorist organization? You can achieve your goal simply through democratic means. You radicalize people on the massive scale, you organize communal rights, you provide the sinews and material that is needed in the communal rights, and you create such a bad social environment which is extremely dangerous for the communal harmony. This is how they operate. Now, once again, coming to the ideology, you in the beginning, like in your introductory remarks, Ararat, you mentioned about the flow of the ideas, and the connections between the South Asian groups and the West Asian groups. I must say that these connections are very organic and they are very strongly, firmly rooted in the entire religious structure. Can you imagine these days in Kashmir, Jamaat-e-Islami Kashmir is strongly connected to Muslim Brotherhood. Jamaat-e-Islami Kashmir is sending its scholars to Turkey to get all the religious education, and they are regularly attending the meetings in Turkey. Jamaat-e-Islami Kashmir is sending its cadres to coordinate, organize things in that Azerbaijan-Armenia war. Can you imagine that? Jamaat-e-Islami Kashmir was connected to that Bosnia fight and conflict. Pakistan was aiding and supporting that. And they are also connected to countries back in Southeast Asia like Malaysia. Again, coming back to the connections, can you guess, in South Asia, which country has the strongest support base for Hamas? It's Malaysia. Once I was talking to one of the Israeli envoys, and I told him that, if you kick out these Hamas extremists from Palestine, from that region, they're going to get safe havens in Malaysia. Then, in a very joking manner, in a very light-hearted manner, he said that, well, good for us and bad for you. Malaysia is too far from us and it's too close to you. So these are the linkages. PFI has its linkages with extremists sitting in Turkey, with Pakistan, even in Sri Lanka, the Easter bombings. You can see that those guys had connections with the PFI and some of the Indian extremist organizations. So these are very organic connections. My third point is that it is not necessarily about the ideology. Ideology is not putting strict restrictions or compartmentalization in these organizations. Let's begin with Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda, we all have a general impression that Al-Qaeda is Salafi Wahhabi. But here, Al-Qaeda's biggest cooperation and coordination was with the Harakat network. Harkatul Jihadul Islami, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Harkatul Mujahideen. They were hands in glove with Al-Qaeda. And Osama bin Laden was the person who helped Jaish-e-Mohammed's chief Masood Azhar raise that organization. He played a key figure in creating that organization, Jaish-e-Mohammed. Jaish-e-Mohammed believes in Deobandi ideology. Dr. Adil Rashid knows a lot about that, and he has spoken at our platform on various occasions about that. And Al-Qaeda, that's what we assume, that they believe in the strict Salafi ideology. But when you go down to their functioning in various conflict zones, I find that if you want to use one word for the ideological domain, then it's pan-Islamism, I must say. Even for that matter, Jamaat-e-Islami in Kashmir, you will not find all the cadres or the people who are associating with Jamaat-e-Islami strictly believing that ideology. You'll find people who come from the Atkadi ideology, which is essentially a Sufi ideology. You'll find people coming from the Tablighi Jamaat factions. You'll find people coming from Deobandi ideology. So it's a good mix. Basic idea is pan-Islamism. Even ISIS in Kashmir, like these days, ISIS is a major phenomenon in India, and ISIS is spreading like crazy. It's spreading like hell in the hinterland of India, remote parts of India. So now, as Dr. Gunaratna rightly said in the beginning, that this is the third wave of terrorism, which we see, and this is much more widespread. I find it a much more decentralized and scattered form of extremism, where you don't need even state sponsors, or you don't need even formal structures. You radicalize a person, a whole society, a general youth is radicalized. And the way ISIS is spreading in India, it's very unique. So they are distributing that propaganda, hateful literature, and also various ways to generate and to create weapons. People don't need to get all those automatics, Kalashnikovs and all those weapons. They're training them to make crude weapons, IEDs, bombs, chemical bombs. So these little playbooks, those manuals are being distributed. And on the other hand, you have organizations like PFI who are already radicalizing the people at the mass level. So they're all working in a very closely coordinated manner. So at the grassroots, I don't see ideological barriers or ideological differences, making a huge impact. In fact, I must say, a typical Salafi Wahhabi organizations or Salafi Wahhabi ideology could never find a much headway in India. Never. Even in Kashmir, in Kashmir, the Al-Qaeda, ISIS, they could not make much headway because, they came with that typical extreme Salafi Wahhabi ideology. Saudi Arabia could not make much headway, but as compared to Saudi Arabia, Turkey made a much stronger base in India, in Kashmir, in other parts of India. Why? Because they did not project themselves as strictly Salafi or strictly Wahhabi. They projected themselves as pan-Islamic, like leader of the Ummah. So now I think I see that there is some convergence at a certain level. Ideological differences do exist at a very scholarly level, at a higher level, at a clerical level, but in operational matters, there is a strong convergence. In Pakistan, if you go and see, as Dr. Rashid rightly pointed out, we see this Hanafi groups, and getting into extremism. All this Labbaik movement, they are not Wahhabis. Labbaik movement is a typical Sufi Barelvi movement, and they are the pioneers of this blasphemy movement. They have come out as the most brutal and extremist group. In Udaipur in Rajasthan, this fellow Kanhaiya was killed and he was brutally murdered. His his head was chopped off in a very ISIS style. People thought that the boys who killed them, they had some connections with the ISIS. No, in the investigations, it was found out that they were the local boys from Sufi groupings, and they killed him simply on those grounds of blasphemy because he criticized Prophet. Those boys were not from any big terrorist groups like Al Qaeda, Lashkar, or Hizbul Mujahideen. They were simply radicalized lot, and they were working on the ground. So I guess social media and the cyber radicalization, combined with the workings of these Islamist groups like Jamaat-e-Islami, PFI, and also this whole international movement, and also the conflict situations and the geopolitical developments in various parts of the world. They are creating a very, I would say, coordinated phenomenon of extremism, which needs a very different approach to deal with that, must say. And coming to the last part, I must say that the countermeasures need a very detailed review. But yes, intelligence cooperation and coordination, joint exercises, they're definitely going to be very effective, because this is a phenomenon which is spreading at a social level. And secondly, community engagement. Community engagement is super important. You have to talk to the community leaders. Recently, one incident happened in Delhi. Few people were offering prayers. They were offering namaz on the main road, blocking the road. A police chap came and he started kicking them in a very, I would say, insulting manner. Later, he was, suspended from his job. But then I didn't come across any religious leader criticizing the very fact that, that those boys were offering prayers on the road, blocking the whole road. And this is what happens in every common city of India. In my city, if you come on festivals like Eid and other festivals, you can see like the huge mass of people blocking the road for almost kilometers, and it has become a routine phenomenon. Now, it's the people, the government has to engage the community through good community leaders. Otherwise, those extremist, hateful preachers will go and tell them that this is your right, do that, exercise that right. So this is very crucial, the community engagement. And I guess with this, I rest my case. Definitely, there is a lot more, but I can speak. But thank you very much. Okay? And I would like to just show also my other book. This is Radicalization in India, and this is the book in which I discussed about the Kashmir radicalization in detail and Kerala radicalization in detail. I've also offered an index, a tool to measure radicalization at various levels. And in this, I discussed. This is the first book which discusses about Turkey's extremist activities in India and Jamaat-e-Islami's activities in India. And we also predicted the Pulwama Fidain attack in this book, and also the abrogation of Article 370. So that way, those who are interested, they will find some good ground level research material in these two books. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pandya, for giving us insightful definition of how the jump from ideological to operational have been possible, and you have presented also the geopolitical link with the terrorist groups that not many experts these days are in performing such research. Mostly it's localized. And I would like also to link your presentation to Dr. Rashid's presentation, when he has mentioned that today what is taking place, that terrorist organizations are being state-sponsored or in collaboration with states. We have, as Dr. Pandya slightly mentioned, we have that example has taken place in second Nagorno-Karabakh when Turkey deployed terrorist fighters from Syria, which has been under Turkish control in the territory of Idlib. So we have seen the example, and I believe that example will rise, and other states that they are harboring and financing and giving shelter to terrorists will deliver them to other regions, hopefully not. But at the same time, I want to mention it has its positive side also. This Turkey's policy regarding the Nagorno-Karabakh war and Pakistan's stance, which is the only country that diplomatically hasn't recognized Armenia as a sovereign state, drove the policy that Armenia and India, which they had historically brotherly and friendly relations, today they caused the revive of regenerating and developing close relations militarily as well, and hopefully economically between India and Armenia. This is not the topic that we are discussing today, but I wanted to make the linkage that whatever the extremists and the fundamentalists try to bring catastrophic situations to the world, in all levels, we are able to create also positive relationships and positive outcomes to bring peaceful region and peaceful world. As we don't have questions, Dr. Rashid, one minute, please. My other questions, the same questions that asked to Dr. Barak goes to Dr. Rashid as well, but he mentioned in his presentation already, and due to a request from our audience, from our audience, instead of question and answering session, I would like to give few minutes more to Dr. Rashid to continue his presentation. That is a request from our audiences. Dr. Barak,
maybe I can have a comment.
Yes.
Regarding the question, I'm not like to make speculations what can be the evolvement of Islamic ideology, but definitely there is a positive shift in the Muslim world, especially in the Arabic world, when it's regarding the fighting the radical Islamic ideologies. If I'm speaking about the religious establishment in Egypt, Al-Azhar institution, so since 2014, he has managed to fight and to have specific special programs against radicalization and preventing radicalization, of course. And he has published in about 18 different languages, in Arabic, also in Indian, scriptures that refute the justifications of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in using violence. Also, he goes against the Muslim Brotherhood. So I was very optimistic when I saw the good work of Al-Azhar in this regard, but I was very disappointed to find out that Al-Azhar actually is exploiting his international legitimacy to demonize Israel. Now, after the 7th of October, Al-Azhar published a fatwa that all the citizens of Israel are regarded as legitimate targets. So he's, in other words, he is justifying killing Israelis. And in this way, I don't think that he is losing his credit in this regard. But in the matter of fighting on radical Islamic ideology, so he is doing a good job. But when you know that in United Arab Emirates, those Abrahamic agreements, Abu Zaid, the leader of UAE, he established a complex of a mosque, a church, and the synagogue in order to show that that all the monotheistic faiths and also not monotheistic, also Buddhism, Hinduism, they can coexist. In other way, he tried to promote an interfaith, which is a good sign. But when Al-Azhar leader Sheikh Ahmad Al-Taib was invited to participate in this ceremony to open this complex, he did not want to come because there was a Jewish rabbi. So when you combine politics with religion, I think it's not a good thing to do. It's you also cause, even if you don't intentionally want, you cause to a radicalization on a specific country, a specific ethnic group. In this regard, let's say the Salafi ideology is being challenged by Muslim religious authorities, but in places where there is no, let's say there is no any central regime, central rule, like in Africa, and the international community doesn't pay enough attention to this region. So in these places in Africa, in the Sahel region, you can see explosion, metaphorically, of Salafi Salafi ideology dissemination, which is Al-Qaeda is responsible for that on ISIS. So in this matter, this is dangerous. Another evolution, if you want, I don't like the way, I don't like to use the word evolution, because I think in history we have to analyze developments only when enough years will pass, and then we can have an extensive view in order to analyze. So I think it's too soon to speculate and to assess what can be the evolution, but we can say that, like was mentioned in this panel, that there is a growing cooperation between Sunni and Shia. I call it Sushi, Sunni and Shia, thanks to Iran involvement. So we see the Houthi and Al-Qaeda, and also now the Muslim Brotherhood cooperation in Yemen, for example. So this is maybe these can create, I don't know, again, it's only an assessment, a unique ideology. I don't think so, because everybody is keeping his own faith, but because when you share a joint interest, then you can cooperate against the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So this is like the interest.
Thank you, Dr. Barak, very much for giving more detailed explanation. I'm sure that will help our audience to understand more clearly the situation and definitions. I want to go back to Dr. Rashid. As I have mentioned, as we don't have more questions, Dr. Rashid, I will give you another 5 minutes for more explaining your points that you have mentioned to clarify. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I would like to say that I would add a few things what Mr. Pandya said and then what Mr. Barak said. There are three kinds of there are three categories which we should always remember. The first category is of mainstream Muslims, mainstream Islam. The mainstream Islam, which the world follows generally, is just a religion. The Muslims who are all around the world, they follow a particular belief system and forms of worship, and they have their religion like any other religion, like Christianity or Hinduism. The other movement which has come out of Islam, unfortunately, is what we today call political Islam. And Jamaat-e-Islami is the architect of political Islam, with Maulana Maududi considered to be the Karl Marx. This is the exact the words which have been given to him. If you want to understand the political philosophy, the philosophy of political Islam, the only person who has completely given a full explanation of it and told about its tenets is Maududi. In fact, Sayyid Qutb and Hassan al-Banna acknowledge contribution. And if you read that literature, it appears to be more of a derivative. So Maulana Maududi's books on what should be an Islamic state like, what kind of an Islamic state should be, is actually Maulana Maududi's contribution. Now, Jamaat-e-Islam, so you have one which is Islam. The derivative movement is political Islam, which is an unfortunate political development. What is the belief of political Islam? How is it different from mainstream Islam? Political Islam says that in Islam, there is an inbuilt political system. and that if you do not impose that inbuilt political system in your society or on the world, you are not following Islam. You cannot be a true Muslim if you do not establish an Islamic state, if you do not politically impose an Islamic way of life. This is different from the mainstream Islam, which says that Islam is just a religion about forms of worship, about moral conduct, and about some dogma about heaven, hell, and whatever belief systems there are. So we need to make a differentiation between Islam and political Islam. Out of this political Islam, there is another thing which has come out, which is jihadism. This is the third subcategory. Jihadism also comes out from political Islam. It wants to establish a political state of Islam, but it only wants to use militant ways of forming an Islamic state. So it only uses militant jihad, violent, militant, indiscriminate jihad to establish political Islam. So political Islam in itself, just as Mr. Pandya was talking about, Jamaat-e-Islami is a political Islam organization. It can use non-violent ways also to create an impression on the society. It can do charitable work. It can do educational work. It can create some kind of place its people in positions of power, sometimes try to get into democratic elections only to subvert democracy. So this is the more non-violent form of political Islam. The more radical, violent form of jihadism has its own ideology. It says even if you are not able to establish a political Islamic state, your very act of dying and doing shahada in the name of Islam is making you successful. So for them, sacrificing oneself in and doing jihad is itself success. So there are three strains of Islam which we should very clearly know. Now, it is easier for authorities to understand jihadist organizations because they are fighting. It is also easy for authorities to understand what is a mainstream Muslim, one who goes for namaz or roza or whatever. That is fine, as long as he is following the rules of the land and not creating any security problems, following his religion only, no problem. We don't understand this in-between political Islam ideology, which is having an agenda to change the existing political system and to bring in a new political system, which is its own invention, which Maududi has reinterpreted after reading Quran and Hadith, Maududi and other people like him. So we need to understand political Islam as the main problem. And these people are very smart. They know how to use the constitution to remain safe. They know how to be in a democracy and to use the very systems of democracy to actually continue their propaganda. So even without violence, they can undermine the process. So we need to become smart. When we are doing counter-terrorism or counter-radicalization measures in the legislative section, we need to understand that these organizations are actually the front organizations which later create jihadi groups also. They bring people from mainstream Islam to political Islam. They subvert their minds and then they make them into jihadis. Or even if they don't remain jihadis, they remain the repositories of secessionism. So we need to understand these differences. And so they generally follow the socialist ways, the ways of Maoism, the ways of the Red Army, the ways of influencing society. So the way Hamas operates, the way Muslim Brotherhood operates in society, giving free clinics and free charitable things, and similarly in India, the way Jamaat-e-Islami operates is almost directly taken from the communist ways of spreading the propaganda and influencing the society. We need to understand that. The other thing I would like to say here, Al-Azhar University is also not a Salafi university. Al-Azhar is a Hanafi university. It teaches all the schools of Islamic law. Salafi Wahhabis are problem, but they are not always the problem. Sometimes you see about 1 crore Indians are working in Salafi Wahhabi countries. Saudi Arabia is a Wahhabi country. It is based on the philosophy of Abdul Wahhab, the Pact of 1744. Only now MBS has tried to distance himself from that. But until now, it is a Wahhabi country. Qatar is a Wahhabi country. Every Wahhabi is not a problem. If you come to know about Nasiruddin Albani, Nasiruddin Albani is the most conservative Wahhabi philosopher and ideologue. You would actually not like to even read him. He's so conservative in so many ways. But he has said in 1990, before his death, that Palestinians should leave Israel and should leave the Palestinian territories without fighting. And he was criticized by Salafis and non-Salafis. So there are all kinds of Salafis. There are peaceful Salafis. There are the Madkhali Salafis. There are the Sururi Salafis. There are our problem of our counter-terrorism measure is we do not understand the enemy, we don't read them. So we need to have different set of measures for different sets of challenges. So we need to understand. Similarly, Al-Azhar is, they had a conference in Grozny, in Chechnya, where they threw the Salafis out of the Sunni fold. Russia wanted that the Salafis should be thrown out of Sunni Islam. And Al-Azhar University had a conference in Grozny, in Chechnya, in which they threw away the Salafis. Saudi Arabia was very angry at that, way back in 2014. So,
Dr. Rashid, please, can we conclude?
I'm saying when we talk about matters, Salafi, Wahhabi are the problem, or Hanafi are the problem, we should actually know who are Salafis and who are Wahhabis. And we should know that Al-Qaeda was more broad-minded. ISIS is not. Al-Qaeda was more, if you read the philosophy, Al-Qaeda says, we will be open to non-Salafi organizations also. That is part of its ideology. The ideology of ISIS is different. It is purely Salafi. So that is what we need to know the differences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for continuing your presentation and clarifying for the audiences. I'm sure they were interested, and I had many remarks to give you a chance for clarifying a bit more. Dr. Gunaratna, do you have any short remarks after all these presentations? If you could make, I will end the session if you have anything to add, and Dr. Pandya as well.
Very quickly to say that I have discussed about the emergence of the third wave of terrorism in this book, where both the Muslim Brotherhood organization and the Salafi Wahhabi organization, those who are radicalized by these two streams, they produced the preconditions so that Islamic State can mount this attack. So what we are seeing today is very significant cooperation between the ideological groups, the ideological spectrum, in a way the threat will move. So the next phase of threat, what I call the third wave, is Shia and Sunni groups working together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Dr. Pandya.
Yes, yeah. I mostly agree with what the other speakers said. And towards the end, I would like to say that, yes, I think we should be much more nuanced in our counter-terrorism measures. And there's no point bracketing the entire ideology or a sect, as radical, like what Dr. Rashid said, like all Salafis. That's a very problematic statement where you start categorizing them like that. Here, some of the Salafi countries like UAE, Saudi Arabia, I think they have been the most successful ones, and their understanding is far more nuanced when it comes to dealing with counter-terrorism or dealing with terrorism or extremism or even radicalization. Their governments have been far more effective. So I think we need to understand, going beyond these very straight-jacketed, I would say, confines of ideologies, we need to understand how these Islamist organizations work on the grassroots, on the ground level, and how they occupy the spaces in the mainstream Muslim society, how they are able to capture the minds of the youth. That's where you need to target, because if we want a real effective solution-based policy. And here I must say that different strands of policies are needed. For example, coming to a very, very practical solution. For example, if you have an organization like Jamaat-e-Islami getting active in a particular area, the best way would be to identify the main coordinators. You'll find that there is a group of at least 3 to 4 main clerics who are out in the open doing the hateful propaganda. Then there would be another layer of, let's say, 10 to 15 coordinators who are completely working incognito, and they're the real decision makers, finance coordinators, operational managers, logistics, and the planners. You need to identify such people, and for that you need a very effective and efficient intelligence mechanism. And then, while dealing with such main coordinators, the masterminds, you need to use hard kinetic measures, covert assassinations, let's say, by neutralization. That's a brilliant idea. And at the same time, you need to reach out to the community on the larger scale, through spiritual channels, through religious channels, to counter the narrative. So this is just one example that I have, quoted. And I must say that, while working with these, or while countering these organizations, we should never underestimate their social reach and strength. These organizations like PFI and Jamaat and Muslim Brotherhood, they have a massive penetration and massive strength at the societal level. They operate through various encrypted communication applications and through very strong influence over the social elites, the common people, like what Dr. Rashid said, the socialist methodology. Every way, in each and every manner, the playbook is copied. And our agencies, our intelligence agencies, law enforcement agencies, they are not properly equipped. In fact, leave aside getting properly equipped in terms of skills and equipment, even their understanding is extremely flawed and very insufficient. So there is a problem which requires a much holistic and a nuanced understanding and a long-term, I would say, solution to address the problem. Because this is not just a problem of law and order. This is a problem of geopolitics. This is a problem of sociology. This is a problem of politics. This is something which is very widespread. That's all I have to say. So I think with this, I'll just rest my case, and you can conclude the session.
Thank you very much. I would also add briefly on the issue, on the point that we all agreed upon, the ideology, that sometimes it's more important than the violence. I believe the violence is the outcome of the invented so-called ideology, because ideology is not idle, and violent attack is not by itself. They have created first the ideology. For that reason, I have written the articles of stressing and emphasizing the ideology of terrorist groups, and at the same time, later on, I have written about why Islamism failed in Syria. I have shown, in a way, I don't agree with the notion that either Salafism or other ism is not problem. I believe that is partially true or partially right, because if as long as any group or party seeking for imposing Sharia state to the nation and to the others, especially if the countries are multi-ethnic and multicultural, I believe that is the problem and that is the threat. Salafism might be not a threat, but when you are imposing Sharia, to impose Sharia state, especially in countries such as Middle East, that we have multicultural, multi-ethnic, and Southeast Asia as well, you have multi-ethnic and multi-religious communities. So in that term, I believe that ideology matters. And also, I've seen in Southeast Asia, as I have mentioned, especially in Indonesia lately, the the version or the vision of Wasatiyya, moderate Islam vision, is being successful at this level. And also in community level, I believe that we have to also show, as academics, as experts, we have to show the examples of peaceful coexistence and peaceful cohesion between different religions, so that it could be also educational and motivational for other societies and communities. That was my part, and I would like to thank all our panelists. It was a pleasure to be a moderator, and I would like to thank also Dr. Pandya and Usanas Foundation. And I'm being also a research fellow at Usanas Foundation, which is an honor that I have been a moderator for this session. Coming to Dr. Rashid, we have also something in common, not only as being experts, but I'm also feeling not very well today like you, but respecting all of you, I had the courage to be chair at this session. And I would like to thank our audiences, and I would like to thank the people who written the questions, and hopefully we can meet again. I'm closing this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ararat. And once again, thanks to all the esteemed panelists who joined us today for all the sessions, for the interview on Iran, Burzin Wagmar, and for the session on China, the cartographic aggression of China, and also this session on West Asian and South Asian Islamist organization. It was a delight listening to all the esteemed speakers, and my special thanks to Dr. Rohan Gunaratna, and also to Dr. Adil Rashid. You were not well, but still you made an effort and you joined us today. Thank you very much. Same thanks to you also, Ararat. Being unwell, you joined us today, and thank you, Michael Barak, Dr. Michael. And also, I would like to thank my entire Usanas team who made great efforts to make this event a success. And I would like to thank Dr. Anita Jain, who is a director, Director Finance and Admin, Preeti Khenta, who is a Senior Program Coordinator, Shivani, Nikita, Mahak, and Niharika, Harshita, Shubhi, Ruchika, Arundhati, Satyansh, and Anthony. Thank you very much.